This morning, America felt like one giant waiting room. In cities and small towns alike, a sense of anticipation hung in the air, uniting millions in a rare moment of collective suspense. People from all walks of life paused their routines, their attention fixed on a single question that would soon echo across the nation. From bustling New York coffee shops, where the aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the low hum of anxious conversation, to quiet Iowa farmhouses, where families gathered around kitchen tables and living room TVs, all eyes were on Washington, D.C. The nation's capital had become the focal point of a debate that reached far beyond its marble halls. The Supreme Court was about to decide, how much power should the president have over the nation's economic lifeblood? The stakes were enormous, with consequences that could ripple through every household, business, and community. Protesters and supporters crowded the marble steps, their voices rising in chants and debate, each side convinced the future of the country hung in the balance. News crews from across the globe set up their cameras, ready to broadcast a verdict that could reshape not only American policy but the very nature of global trade and governance. The case, American Importers Alliance versus United States, was set to define the limits of presidential authority, challenging decades of precedent and raising fundamental questions about the separation of powers. At its core, the case was about the balance of power with Congress, and whether one branch could unilaterally shape the nation's economic destiny. As the clock neared 10 a.m., the tension was palpable. Every tick of the second hand seemed to stretch time itself, as citizens, lawmakers, and legal experts alike braced for the outcome. This wasn't just about tariffs or trade agreements. It was a test of our democracy, a moment that would reveal how power is checked and balanced in the world's oldest constitutional republic. The answer was about to arrive, opening a new chapter in the American story, one that would be studied, debated, and remembered for generations to come. This case was never just about economics, or even about the price of steel and aluminum. It was about something much deeper, about the very foundation of how power is distributed in the United States, and about the rules that keep our democracy in balance. At its core, this legal battle was about the structure of American democracy, and whether the delicate system of checks and balances could withstand the pressures of modern governance. The Constitution, written over 2 centuries ago, carefully divides power among Congress, the President, and the courts. Congress is given the authority to regulate commerce and impose taxes, ensuring that no single branch can act unilaterally when it comes to the nation's economic fate. In 1962, Congress passed the Trade Expansion Act, and Section 232 of that law gave presidents a special tool, the ability to impose tariffs for reasons of national security. At the time, this was seen as a narrow exception, a safeguard for emergencies, not a blank check. Decades later, the Trump administration invoked this power in a sweeping way, imposing tariffs on a wide range of imports. This move sparked alarm across the political spectrum, as many feared the White House could now bypass Congress entirely and wage trade wars at will, simply by invoking national security. Supporters of this approach argued that presidents need flexibility to respond quickly to global threats and economic shifts, especially in a world where events move at lightning speed and traditional legislative processes can be slow and cumbersome. But critics saw something far more troubling, a dangerous erosion of the constitutional checks and balances that have protected American democracy for generations. They warned that allowing one person to wield such sweeping power could set a precedent that would be difficult to reverse. The Supreme Court was now faced with a profound question. Had Congress, in its effort to protect the nation, given away too much of its own power to the executive branch? Was the balance of power shifting in a way the founders never intended? The answer to this question would determine whether a single individual, the president, could unilaterally impose massive taxes on Americans and foreign nations alike, all under the broad and often vague banner of national security. In the end, this was more than a legal dispute. It was a fight for the soul of our republic, a test of whether the system designed to prevent tyranny could still hold firm in the face of new challenges. To grasp today's ruling, rewind to 2018. The Trump administration imposed sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminum, citing national security, even targeting close allies. The move sparked global trade wars, with countries retaliating against American goods. U.S. steel and aluminum producers cheered, but farmers and manufacturers relying on imports suffered as costs soared and markets closed. The tariffs created winners and losers, dividing communities and industries. The uncertainty lingered through the next administration, stalling business investment and planning. Eventually, a coalition of importers and businesses challenged the tariffs in court, arguing they were the result of an unconstitutional power grab. That legal battle set the stage for today's historic decision. Let's break it down. A tariff is simply a tax on imported goods. If the US puts a 10% tariff on German cars, that $40,000 car now costs $44,000. The goal? Make imports pricier to protect American industries and jobs, but tariffs also raise prices for consumers and businesses, since costs are often passed along the supply chain. Even American companies using imported materials feel the pinch. Tariffs can spark international disputes. Other countries retaliate, hurting US exports like soybeans. The result? A complex web of winners and losers with higher prices and unpredictable consequences. The debate is always whether protectionism's benefits outweigh its costs. The legal battle over Section 232 tariffs was fierce. Importers argued the law gave the president a blank check to impose taxes, Congress's job, not the executive's. The government countered that national security required flexibility, and the president needed discretion to act. In Supreme Court arguments, justices pressed both sides. Where's the line between real threats and economic policy? Could any import be labeled a security risk? The justices sought a clear limit to executive power. The debate reached deep into constitutional history, with both sides invoking the founders' intent. The courtroom became an arena for deciding how 18th century principles apply to 21st century realities. In a landmark 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court decisively checked presidential power, sending shockwaves through Washington and beyond. This ruling marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the limits of executive authority, especially when it comes to matters of national security and economic policy. The majority opinion found that the executive branch's broad use of national security as a justification for imposing tariffs was inconsistent with the Constitution's carefully crafted separation of powers. The justices emphasized that the president cannot simply invoke national security as a catch-all reason to bypass Congress and reshape trade policy at will. While the law itself wasn't struck down, the court established a much stricter test for future actions. From now on, any tariffs imposed under the guise of national security must be directly tied to a real, plausible, and clearly defined threat to the nation's defense. Vague or hypothetical dangers will no longer suffice. The court made it clear, economic competition, even from powerful rivals, is not enough to justify sweeping trade restrictions. There must be a genuine, imminent risk to national security, not just concerns about market share or industry health. As a result, the ruling immediately invalidated the broad steel and aluminum tariffs that had been imposed in recent years, sending industries and markets scrambling to adjust. The decision also raises the bar significantly for any future president seeking to use similar powers, ensuring that such actions will face intense judicial scrutiny. Dissenting justices voiced strong concerns, warning that this new standard could hamstring presidents in a rapidly changing and dangerous world. They argued that the executive needs flexibility to respond to unforeseen threats. But the majority insisted that it is Congress, not the president alone, who must ultimately decide the nation's trade policy. Now, any president who wishes to impose tariffs for national security reasons must provide credible, concrete evidence of a direct threat. The days of sweeping executive action without oversight are over, and the burden of proof has shifted dramatically. With this decision, the power to shape America's trade policy shifts firmly back to Congress, restoring the balance of power as the Constitution intended, and reaffirming the legislative branch's vital role in safeguarding both the economy and the nation's security. The decision sent shockwaves through the economy. Businesses relying on imports, cars, appliances, construction are immediate winners, with costs dropping and prices likely to fall. Domestic steel and aluminum producers, once protected, now face tough global competition and warn of layoffs. For most families, lower prices on goods could feel like a small tax cut, boosting spending and growth. But communities dependent on metals manufacturing face uncertainty and job losses. Farmers also stand to gain, as the ruling could help roll back retaliatory tariffs and reopen foreign markets. The economic deck is reshuffled, relief for some, new challenges for others. The trade war's winners and losers are changing overnight. With the court's ruling, the trade debate shifts to Congress. Lawmakers can no longer rely on the president to take the lead or the blame on tariffs. The responsibility for America's trade policy now rests squarely with our elected representatives. Expect fierce debates and new alliances as Congress decides protectionism or free trade. The issue will shape upcoming elections, with candidates forced to take clear positions. The challenge: craft a balanced policy that serves all Americans, not just a few industries. The Supreme Court has cleared the board, now Congress must make the next move. Legal experts call this one of the most significant separation of powers cases in decades. The decision could spark challenges to other broad presidential powers, from emergency declarations to military actions. Economists predict lower inflation and stronger growth, but warn of tough transitions for industries losing protection. On the world stage, allies welcome a return to negotiation over confrontation. The ruling is a reminder: American democracy's checks and balances still work. Citizens and businesses challenged executive action, and the courts recalibrated the balance of power. Now, the future of trade and America's role in the world rests with Congress and the people. The conversation is just beginning.